Right, and that's certainly true of this piece here. It's an interesting thing to try and perhaps characterize a little bit of what things were like in terms of my interest in wanting to go beyond. Even though I've been, as Roger had mentioned, I've been very concerned with organizing or helping to co-organize this whole grassroots level of activist stuff with the radical fairies and Harry and John, and then we split off and we were doing tree roots, and it was a very hands-on activist time and period, moving into the 80s. As you all might know, if you know any of this history, the radical fairies didn't turn out to be a very interested area to want to explore more seriously, espousing a more honest psychological approach to gay spirit realization, or whatever gay spirit realization might be framed as or called, because as I discovered, I was rather naive at first on this matter. I've been into my own personal development for many years, as I mentioned to you, since really the age of 13. But I've also, ever since the age of about 14 or 15, become what might be called a political activist pretty continuously. And eventually, when I came out, I wanted to combine the two of them. And after I combined the two of them, I never felt that my own personal being as a gay psychological being wanted to go backwards from that. So that's what I brought by the time I was involved with Harry and John to that situation there. I was interested in becoming more espousing of the psychological attitude. And I was naive about it in the sense I was not naive about my own person. I've been now for many years. I struggled with my own demons, my own defenses through a variety of styles of therapy and self-practice, which I was more and more incorporating ongoingly. But when we came to others, that was the great challenge. By others, I mean here I'm operating at an organizing level. I'm not a social being in that sense by this time in my life, already by the early 20s. I don't exist that way really anymore. My social life is my organizing life. And as well as my academic life, my scholarly life, and in my 20s, then my kooky life. I don't know what kooky is. I'm learning and practicing at this time weird stuff, gestalt therapy, bioenergetics. You put in the body the weird pose, these weird historical things you wouldn't remember them now. Long time ago, a gestalt bioenergetic gay therapist of 1970, me in Berkeley, and he's having me like this, and hold these poses of my body until I'm just in these incredible feelings of racking sobs in my body, and this is in the integrating levels of trauma feltness of 1971, in Berkeley, California. Yeah, very strange and trippy stuff. One might think very weird, very experimental, certainly, perhaps even now considered in many ways. Certainly back then was considered extremely radical stuff. Many of the folks, like the therapist I just mentioned, she was long dead of AIDS. Long dead. It was an early, unfortunate casualty of that disease. Dead, more than a generation past now. Dead, this man I mentioned. Eli was his name. But nonetheless, so by the time I'm getting deeper and deeper in my own self-development, that's what led me to Jung, as I mentioned, to various interesting experiences I won't get into here. So I want to bring this to my involvement with Harry, who has this tremendous vision of what gay could mean, and what I was understanding in psychological terms is then self-actualization, or Jungian, more strictly in terms of individuation. I was trying to bring this to, I wanted to understand what I felt I discovered this understanding of being gay through my own person, to my own inner work, this kind of sensibility. So when I met Harry, it was like meeting someone who is a different route of his own personal individuation. I discovered concepts and sensibilities very similar, but he was not, even though he'd been in therapy in the 30s with the Jungian, by the way, he was actually very anti-psychological, and I discovered actually almost everyone was. It doesn't matter, because I thought if I organized those people, like his folks who said and presented themselves as very advanced, that if I mention the psychological ideas, to me they're not ideas. This is why early psychoanalysis was, before it got integrated, sucked away well enough, was felt as a threat by much of the establishment and the system at the turn of the last century, because, and the early practitioners so thought of themselves. There's something very dangerous in becoming psychologically authentic. There's something very politically, still, a century later, extremely radically politically dangerous about this whole way of grasping human reality and the issue or struggle to live a good life or a meaningful life, or be decent or moral or so on and so forth, to oneself as well as to others. This is still, in my opinion, loaded stuff even now. And this is, in my opinion, why I was all along attracted to psychological understanding, because I always saw it or approached it from a political point of view, and it was natural to me to understand psychological understanding in political terms, meaning power terms or power relations, terms of power relations. So this is what I wish to bring this level of grasping to my involvement with Harry and John and the other affairs, and I started that, and soon discovered, which is naive of me, that none of them were interested in this grasp. And it would often be claimed to be just an intellectual matter that it was so, but if that was scratched at all, like through debate or something, I would quickly see with the party or parties involved that it was a matter of really personal defenses, what I might call now personal psychological defenses. It's not a neutral business. This is the area of understanding is not a neutral business. By the time I met Harry and John, I had written the double and was functioning in that kind of comprehension. It was only after I encountered tremendous difficulty wanting to move forward on an activist level with fellow organizers at a psychologically honest and upfront level that I realized that all that had to be approached much more seriously, whether it was in terms of the activism itself, the organizing itself, the banding together of brothers, so to speak, and sisters and whoever might eventually come, itself, as well as the ideas and understanding underpinning that eventually, even though I'm looking at the body and the soul and the mind as all coterminous with each other, it's very important to have a way of understanding these matters. And this led me back to, after it had been clear enough what direction to go in after this, I had to go through all the things that Harry and John and we split up as I had described to you, Don and I. Went on to found Tree Roots in 1982. We were organizing and doing an act for a while. I had no interest to go back to formal Jungian theory, being that level of serious scholarship and depth of understanding at that point, because I was so wrapped up in this level of just activists getting together to do workshops and trainings and things on the level that Don and I were trying to organize the community here in town at that time. But as we went along, more and more, even though I now moved from the fairies to this Tree Roots level of getting more at that, there was still something missing from the whole thing. And this, at first I didn't understand what it was, but very gradually, it was more and more a sense to me that I had to return to a more serious development of gay-centered Jungian thought. There had to be a larger body of basic material. It didn't have to be like enormous. I didn't feel like this a calling to do like millions of pages or something like that, or collected works like that. It was like enough of I should make enough more to make a kind of basic statement of what could be a core of understanding that can be developed, could be eventually developed around a gay way of appreciating Jungian analytic understanding, both in theory and method, vis-a-vis gay liberation, not vis-a-vis being Jungian, or for any other reason, but for the reason of really honoring that love, that what might impel us to become gay identified to begin with. That would be classy. That would be really nice, because that's never been done. If any of you are familiar with Jungian literature, as well as many other literatures, it's not respectful of homosexual experience in general. Jung, as you will imagine, was a rather homophobic fellow himself at his time and place. Probably considered liberal in many ways. Was not like a burn 'em alive type person towards homos, but not exactly sweetie pie either, if you know the details, which I won't get into here. But he had very little to say about it, and that was reflected in the literature. And so there was not really much, basically, and what there was mainly the same you would find in other literatures, how it's wrong or bad, and why is that so how do you have to fix it? And at the time, even that I wrote this paper in 1988, this was still a debated point. So while, when I read it, you might see that it just starts out talking about homosexuals, and you'll get right away, you'll probably appreciate right away, this is before the era of postmodernist thought that it would do that. And that's what, by the way, is most notable to me when I look at the paper now, other than the body of substance around gay-centered attempt to understand Jungian, important areas of Jungian thought, which is what it's trying to do. But inadvertently, so to speak, it demonstrates an interesting historical moment. It reflects that time. It's the time when I wanted to begin to consolidate, really, some of the things I had been more able now to begin to do through tree roots that had been possible because of the resistance in the fairies to doing it. So this is more copacetic amongst the folks doing the tree roots thing, but if you know that history, you know in the end it wasn't itself deeply, seriously enough authentic. Something even more, and this is what, again, I'm mentioning to you, gradually led me to want to have a more serious Jungian scaffolding for a more serious kind of endeavor. So I then returned to school at this point and got a PhD, and I went to a program where I could make the PhD in Jungian thought, so I could make this a more serious stretch of a grasp of how to understand or combine gay liberation sensibility with a classical Jungian notion of say, individuation, of self. That was my dissertation from 1987, of which this paper is a distillation. It's not certainly a distillation of all of it, but just some of it, some of the important points of it, a little touch of it, so to speak, or taste of it, and it encapsulates, from my experience in tree roots after the fairies, how to begin to look in a broader organizational way. Here, not about people and organizing on the ground in bodies, but rather of thoughts and ways of organizing, ways of thinking about here homosexual phenomena in an affirmative way, in a caring way, in a respectful way, using Jungian terms in a formal sense that the Jungians are very happy to cooperate with. If one addresses the material in a way which it uses the language spoken by those who do this sort of thing, and you do it in the way that they're used to well enough, they cannot reject it. Even though I have no Jungian credential whatsoever, nor ever have had, except having been in Jungian therapy for a long time. And the fact that the journal would accept this paper, I want to suggest, is demonstrating my point. That by being that technically careful and accurate, I can say and do what I want them to say and do, and they will actually publish it in this form, and it's demonstrated thereby. And I'm interested to see this further demonstrated, by the way. I'm not finished with this notion of seeing gay-centered psychological sensibility in print. I would like to see this enormously expanded, and that's one reason I find it pertinent to share the article tonight, because this is not a dead business. Even though the article is from so long ago, from 23 years ago, in my opinion, it's more pertinent now than ever